This morning I am joined by Molly Shepard, and we are going to have a brief and concise and not enough time to even really talk about religious liberty this morning.
Yeah.
This is not a new topic at Wilshire. It's something that we have addressed from the pulpit and the pews for a long period of time. It is one of our Christian advocacy priorities, and many among us here are religious liberty advocates. It feels a bit strange to say that Baptists have the corner market in regards to religious liberty, particularly because our guest preacher is Methodist. But what we do know is that Baptists historically contributed to religious liberty throughout our history. It's part of our legacy. It's something we should feel proud of as Baptists. But let's take it down a little bit to ground zero, 101. Molly is a graduate of the BJC, the Baptist Joint Committee's Fellows Program, where she learned more about religious liberty and particularly learned how to be an advocate.
Yeah.
And so what is religious liberty, Molly, and how is it protected within our Constitution?
Sure. So if I can take you back to government or history, wherever you learned about the First Amendment, it says, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or preventing the free exercise thereof. So those two clauses are really the two main ways that our religious liberty is protected. The government cannot establish a national religion and force it on its citizens, nor can it prevent us from exercising our religion as we see fit.
Which relates to one of our core tenets as Baptists, soul freedom,
Absolutely.
right? Faith cannot be coerced, or else it's not faith. Right. So in the last month or so, these two Supreme Court decisions may have been overshadowed by another one. Yes. But two Supreme Court decisions recently released two major First Amendment decisions based on religious liberty. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes it feels hard to know how to interpret those rulings, but also leaves us wondering, why does it matter?
Right.
So talk to us a little bit about the rulings.
Sure.
And then also why it should matter to us as people of faith.
Sure. So a couple things. The process in which I would say our religious liberty is currently being threatened is sort of in two steps. So the first is that the conservative majority on the Supreme Court has been overturning a lot of longstanding precedent on religious liberty, protecting our religious liberty, both from the establishment perspective as well as the free exercise perspective. So the most prominent recent examples are the decisions in Carson v. Macon, which has to do with government funding of religious schools, which is more on the establishment side. And then the Kennedy v. Bremerton decision, which is about the public school coach leading a corporate prayer on the 50-yard line, which has to do with free exercise and also establishment. But these Supreme Court rulings themselves don't inherently infringe on our religious liberty. What they do is they open up the opportunity for new legislation to come about that does establish laws that inhibit our religious liberty. So that second step in the process is primarily happening at the state level right now, where conservative lawmakers are beginning to pass legislation that does infringe on religious liberty by using the SCOTUS decisions as their justification. And really, the reason we should care is because as Christians, and especially as Baptists, we care deeply about our right to exercise our own religion, and that the government not force a certain flavor of Christianity on us. And the only way to protect faith freedom for ourselves is to protect it for everyone, whether you hold a different faith or no faith at all. And frankly, I also think it's the Christian thing to do. But really, even from a fully selfish perspective, we should really care about protecting not only our own religious liberty, but everyone else's.
Well, one of the articles I was reading talked about how these two court decisions in particular really not only set precedent for state legislature to come in and weaken, particularly the establishment clause, but also how it really inflames kind of the broader cultural war that we're experiencing in regards to many feeling as if Christianity is being threatened. which leads us to the promotion of ideologies like Christian nationalism. And I think we have said that phrase many of times in this church in particular, but again, 101, what is Christian nationalism and why is it dangerous?
Sure. So to quote directly from the BJC's campaign called Christians Against Christian Nationalism, Christian nationalism seeks to merge Christian and American identities, distorting both the Christian faith and America's constitutional democracy. Christian nationalism demands that Christianity be privileged by the state and implies that to be a good American, one must be Christian. It often overlaps with and provides cover for white supremacy and racial subjugation. So all of that is frightening, but I think the last part in particular about providing cover for white supremacy is one of the most dangerous aspects. Christian nationalism and white supremacy both rely heavily on people's really deeply held identities in a way that cannot be overcome by logic or reasoning. And when we allow these things to creep into our public squares and our governments, they're incredibly difficult to combat. So constant vigilance to sort of prevent them in the first place, which is something that the BJC does, is really important.
So how I guess my next and last question is, how do we act? Like, what are some of the things that we can do now? I mean, if we look forward, January 2023, we've got our state legislature coming. We've been fighting things like vouchers for years. So there are things that we can do now, but what are they?
Sure. Yeah, it's a very confusing landscape, and if you're not following it, kind of constantly, it can be hard to know where to plug in, which is why my number one recommendation is to go follow BJC. So they're on every possible platform that you can imagine: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They have a wonderful email newsletter that goes out regularly, and their website is just chock full of good resources on all kinds of topics about religious liberty. And they also have a podcast called Respecting Religion, which is also about many topics, but most recently they've been covering some of the more recent SCOTUS decisions. So if you want to learn more about those, go check that out. And then the second thing I would say is just to go learn more about your Baptist heritage. I think religious liberty being part of that heritage, to me, is one of the most grounding things in kind of a really crazy political context. And so I would just encourage you to go read more about that and learn about why that's so important to our faith in particular.
Awesome. Thank you, Molly.
Yeah.